Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022, and these are the three questions we're going to be answering in depth today on the Roundup. First up, what is the state of social media globally in 2022? Next, are you telling your college's COVID success stories? And finally, how are STEM OPT majors driving innovation? We'll take a look at these three questions and more on today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. So let's get right into it. As we do each week, we take our three questions that we go in depth on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out Monday morning called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And that can be found at our website, the archive of our most recent editions at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, add your name and email address to the mailing list, and you'll get the newsletter in your inbox every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And from there, you can try and figure out what three questions we're going to cover each Wednesday on the Roundup. So I put the links to the stories that I cover for each of the answers to these questions in the comments section on the Facebook page for the live event for this chat on 1 p.m. Eastern Time every Wednesday. So that's where you can go to find the direct links. If not, refer back to the newsletter to get all the links to all these stories that we're covering today. Now let's get right into that first story. What is the state of social media globally in 2022? For many of you who know me over the last decade or more, you know that it's almost 17 years now I've been doing social media for work. In terms of my life on the university side, when I was with Education USA, getting all their global social channels set up back in 2009, to working and consulting with institutions as they develop their own social media presence and content and strategies around that. So social media it's part of our company name, Social Media and International Ed Consulting. And I always, every once in a while, will cover a broad overview of social media to really examine how big of a change each quarter, each year, social media is having on the world. And it's really interesting to take a deep dive into these. And the two sources I'll be sharing content with for this question, the answer to this question, are Hootsuite and We Are Social. They actually team up together for an annual or actually quarterly reports now. And there's some great snapshot data that I'm going to be sharing with you that answers this question. Now, the world's population is anywhere from 7.5 to 7.9 billion people, now, of the world's population, right now, 4.62 billion people are on social media. And that's an increase year on year of, I think it's every quarter, that's a almost 2 percentage point increase in the last quarter. But over the last year, it's over a 10% increase in the world's population that's currently using social media at least monthly. So the average time that every user spends on social media daily is up to 2 hours and 27 minutes. So that shows you the power of social media in terms of occupying screen time for people around the world. I get a weekly report on my iPhone that tells me across my devices, at least my phone and my iPad, how much time I spend each week on social media. It tells me how much I'm up, how much I'm down. It's about 6.5 hours a day on average that I'm on a phone or tablet, many more on a computer screen as I do my work. But certainly the impact of social on what we do certainly has risen dramatically. So some of the Hootsuite data and We Are Social data will be very helpful, I think, in terms of giving you that perspective, and certainly something that you can share widely with your colleagues, certainly with your leadership, if you're trying to justify why you need to have a better presence on social media than you do. I know many institutions, if you're lucky enough to have access to social media, it might be just the university-wide accounts. It might be just a college account. It might be an admissions account if you're lucky, but rarely is it going to be an international admissions specific one to have the kind of directed content for students in your target markets. Now, what are the biggest platforms in the world? No surprise that the top 5 three of which are messaging apps. Facebook is number one. It's still at 2.5, actually closing in on 3 billion people. So 2.9 billion people are currently on Facebook around the world. So you think it's dead in America? Maybe for your teenagers it is. But when it comes to the rest of the world, they're still catching up. And with wherever you've seen Facebook take off in certain countries, it's been with the youth, the under 18 demographic first. So Facebook certainly continues to boom. YouTube is at 2.5 billion users. WhatsApp and Instagram are next at 2 billion and 1.5 billion roughly for Instagram. WhatsApp is the third most used social platform in the world. After Instagram, we get WeChat, the Chinese juggernaut that is used very much in China as the premier all-in-one social media platform. But it's also being used outside of China by the Chinese diaspora and also those that are looking to invest in China. U.S. businesses, U.S. individuals that have connections in China. WeChat is the dominant platform there. TikTok is coming in, and it's closing in fast on 1 billion users. That is the biggest jump in any messaging platform, certainly any social media platform in the last year. TikTok has seen the most substantial growth in terms of audience, growth in terms of ad revenue, growth in terms of overall impact on particularly the younger audiences. That may be very much what your colleges and universities are looking after. So after that, Facebook Messenger has just been surpassed by TikTok. Then it's some Chinese platforms, Douyin, QQ, and Sina Weibo, and some others down the road. And Telegram has crossed 550 million. Pinterest is at 440 million. Twitter is below Pinterest at 434. So we see these social platforms are just taking off, and it's social. And when it comes to social media, Facebook is still the juggernaut out there, and it has about 350 million more active users than the next closest competitor, YouTube. So your audience is on Facebook. At least 79% of users on 10 of the world's social platforms are also on Facebook. So that's. That really tells you a lot. And whether it's Facebook or the metaverse now, Meta, the company that owns now Facebook, also owns Instagram, also owns WhatsApp, and that universe of metaverse, as they're going to call it, is continuing to expand its impact on the world. So that tells you a lot about the overall growth of those numbers. Where there is overlap, Facebook is the most common denominator outside of China that everybody will be on. The other side of the social media impact that I want to spend some time on is ad revenue, or ad spend, I should say. That what social in particular has become, it's now a third of all digital advertising is done on social media platforms. The reach, and when people talk about audience now, they talk about the reach of potential messaging. YouTube is now 2.56 billion. This has certainly seen a lot of growth. Instagram has also had similar growth, but TikTok has just been going nuts in the growth of their audience and in terms of the ad spend that's currently directed toward social media platforms for companies to reach their targeted populations. So we look at the global social media users. We talked about 4.62 billion people on the planet. Well over half, closing in on actually 60%, almost 2/3 of the world's population are using social media now, 58.4%. So that is something that you certainly want to pay attention to. It's not going away anytime soon. It's grown 10% in the last 12 months. But you look at what's happening in the world when it comes to how people are consuming media, what sources, the amount of face time they spend with screen time that they spend each day, The growth is just incredible in terms of what's coming, what the potential is. And you've seen from over the last 10 years, you've seen the number of social media users on the planet grow from 1.4 billion in January of 2012 to now 4.6 billion. That's an increase of over 3 billion in just the last 10 years are now social media users. And those that when they start in their teen years, and that's when you can first get in front of those audiences that can potentially be your future students. So some great data in the We Are Social and Hootsuite articles this week. Hope you get a chance to check those out. Now let's move quickly into the second question. Are you telling your colleges COVID success stories? This is a question that it seems like we have been in this pandemic for 2 years now. We've had 2 years of students struggling to deal with the changing educational delivery systems that we've tried and failed with, and adjusted and succeeded with. We've had 2 years of students being isolated on campus for those that couldn't go home to those that were forced to leave. We've had 2 years of institutions stepping up and providing for those students, to meeting their needs, to being where they are and showing their true heart as an institution. These success stories, why are they important? When you're thinking about what all the student surveys we've heard over the last 2 years about student perceptions of the United States, and perceptions and realities are oftentimes different, but until that student sees something different, that's their reality, is whatever they're perceiving. And they're perceiving based on news stories. They're perceiving based on the number of deaths the U.S. has had, the number of cases that are happening in the United States. We're a big country. But we share our information openly. We don't know what's happening in China. There are cities still in lockdown because of Omicron rushes there. Their policy of trying to have zero COVID cases is largely failed, but you don't hear much about that outside of China because they have a tight control over what goes on in that country. Whereas in the United States, anybody and their brother with a phone can publish something and show something from an ER, from an interview with a doctor or a nurse, that then becomes viral and then paints a very potentially damning picture of the United States if it's taken as representative of the whole. Now, we all know that social media isn't always authentic, even though it can and should be. It isn't always, and it's used for nefarious purposes sometimes. So why I'm saying this in terms of perception, we have to battle the perception that the U.S. is not safe, particularly on our campuses for students. Any of my colleagues, and I know there's dozens of you out there that work at smaller colleges that had actually remained open from fall of 20 all the way through to today. They've remained open because they're a smaller campus. They can control their environment much better than perhaps a large public institution can, and they've been successful. They've implemented strategies, health and safety mitigation strategies in public buildings with mandatory masking policies, which are very much standard in a lot of colleges these days, even with declining Omicron cases. We've seen social distancing maintained. We've seen large lecture halls kind of go away that have turned into online classes that are supplemented by smaller discussion or lab sections. We've seen those changes happening. We've seen colleges step up when in the residence hall environments, when for quarantine purposes, particular residence halls were designated as quarantine facilities. We've seen the evolution and kind of the moving target that the CDC has put for quarantine times and how people should isolate and when they can resume full activity. All of these things, it's been a moving target, but universities have had to adjust on the fly oftentimes when these new guidelines come out. There have been vaccine mandates that have been imposed and on college campuses more successfully on private colleges than public colleges when there might be political battles going on. That sometimes those political battles can lead to vaccine mandates being overturned. But the point of the matter is, no matter what's going on in the world around us, universities can count and have largely been able to count on being able to provide for their students and trying to do what's best. Not every institution has succeeded in this 100%, but the institutions really obviously have a vested interest in students' safety and health and maintaining that, and they've done what they can to ensure that they've had testing. They go to the extent of testing sewage coming out of residence halls to see if there are spikes in some of the COVID variables that might indicate that there's an outbreak in a particular residence hall. And that leads to quarantining and testing and directed action that can help prevent a spread. We've seen vaccinations roll out heavily on campus since last spring. So we're coming up on a year since students began to be able to have access to the vaccine. And that's certainly something that colleges have seen and can now point to as a real selling point, that we've gotten 90% of our students vaccinated, 95, 97% of our staff are vaccinated. And as a result, that provides a level of comfort for prospective students, prospective parents who might be sending their sons and daughters to you, to know that, hey, these guys have it together. They're addressing the problems that are out there, and they're providing a level of service and security that I, as a parent, would feel comfortable, that myself as a student, if I'm attending a school, would feel comfortable knowing that school has a fairly good idea what they're doing. Now, this question is, are you telling your colleges COVID success stories? The most important stories you need to be capturing are not exactly all those health and safety protocols that I've been talking about, but your current students, your current international students who have lived through this pandemic for 2 years, their experiences, whether they decided to go home, how your campus has adapted in terms of the online teaching that has been available for them to proceed with their courses in a timely manner, how for those that were who stayed in the United States but couldn't stay on campus for whatever reason, what your college did to help that group feel included. And most importantly, those that did stay on campus when everybody left. What did your campus do? Let those students who you can hopefully identify, and particularly those of you that work in international student and scholar offices that have more regular contact with these individuals than perhaps the recruiters would have, get to those students and say, hey, do you have anything positive you can say about how the university or how your college handled COVID, particularly in the worst of it, or how you're handling it now, just to have that contemporaneous story that's current, that is impactful, that is on point for the kinds of concerns that students and parents have about the United States right now. As I said from the top of this question, it's countering perceptions or informing perceptions that students have with your reality so that they can get a sense, a true first-person view from that student of what their life is like on your college campus right now. You want to do that anyway. We've always talked from the beginning that having your current students involved in your recruitment efforts to tell their stories as part of your overall recruitment strategies is absolutely essential if you want to grow, if you want to have direct impact and immediate impact on your prospective student audiences. So the same thing goes here with the COVID stories. If you've been successful in providing a level of service for your students and they are appreciative of that, this is something that you want to capture. This is something that you want to include on your social media, that you want to include a video clip of them in emails that you send out related to health and safety on campus. That can and should be part of your communication flow to prospective students this year. Too many institutions I deal with, they only have process emails that they send out. They think that's the only thing that their emails are good for. It's not about promotion for them. It's not a marketing tool. It's just seen as, this is what you need to do to apply. This is what you need to do to complete your application. This is what you need to do now that you're admitted. This is what you need to do now that you've got your I-20. Here's what you need to do before you come to campus. Those messages are fine and they have to exist in a communication flow. But if that's all you're doing, if you're not including the highlights, the marketing messages for your institution, the value propositions for your institution, the success stories for your institution, you are missing the boat. This boat is taking on water because you haven't plugged the holes that are the perception the world has of the United States right now, of your institution potentially. They don't know what they don't know. So you have to tell them. They can understand an application process, they can understand what they need to submit, but unless you're explaining the value of your institution, that's not just words on a page or on a website, but it's in action from the students that you have on campus that can tell that story about why your campus has such a great commitment to service, why your campus is a engaging place for students from around the world, why your campus takes care of students during global pandemics, and how you've done that. Making those stories a part of your communication flow. And I'm talking not just in email. It needs to be on social media. It needs to be in messaging campaigns that you do beyond email to prospective students. Having video content that you can drop into an email or have repurposed on multiple social platforms is important. It is, in fact, a distinguishing factor if you can do that successfully this year. It should have been a distinguishing factor last year as well. But are you doing that as a regular part of your communication? This is something that I'm working with several clients now on developing these kinds of messaging pieces, whether it's quotes, whether it's short video clips, whether it's students sending an email as part of your comm flow to be available for students to find out, hey, would you like to have a chat about how we're doing with COVID on campus? Those things matter. They can look at a COVID dashboard to get data, but they need personal stories too. That matters. So my article that I wrote, it's a second in a series of articles I'm doing for IDP Connect called Content Priorities Revisited. We did one earlier in the year, early last fall, about outcomes and how are you communicating outcomes to your international student audiences in terms of the messaging you're including. Here now we're talking about COVID stories. So next we'll be talking about some other things that are particularly important in this process. How are you talking about safety? That's not just health and safety like COVID, but how you talk about safety on your college campus. Different stories related to that. So I want everybody to take away from this, and if you're looking for examples of how specific institutions are doing this, there are several links included in the article. There are some of the things that are in here are internal focused, that are the university looking at themselves and how they did, and then sharing some of those results. We've got at individual institutions, graduate students talking about how their experiences were during the pandemic. We have University of California has an entire site dedicated to stories of resilience during the pandemic. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. That is an example for everybody in terms of what you can do. That has interviews with two students about their experiences. You have another one of the pathway providers, Shorelight, gathered international students from 3 of its campus partners to discuss how they navigated the various challenges. You had some students that began their studies remotely because they had decided to leave at the beginning of the pandemic from their home countries. While at Florida International, you had international students that were living on campus while courses were done online. And what did the campus do for them during that period? So those are the kind of stories that pull you in, that say, oh, wow, that was us. Why don't we do something like that? So in the end, what it's doing by having your students tell the story, it's conveying institutional commitment. It's showing that your school really cares about your students. That is putting in place the kind of data that is updated regularly that students can and should go to, but it's also the resources that future students will want to know, hey, this campus really cares, and here's what they've done, and they can share that with their parents if they're not seeing it first. So a lot of great content, examples of that. One in particular I will share with you, and if you like a good cry, I want you to watch this video from a Syracuse student from Chengdu who wrote a song right at the beginning of the pandemic when China was getting all the blame with the previous administration for the pandemic. She wrote a song, "Embrace You." It's in Chinese, but in Mandarin. But it's the video that goes along with that is her. You'll see the subtitles, but it's her on campus wearing a mask out on campus at the beginning of the pandemic, offering hugs to people. And it's a tearjerker. Yeah, see if you can get through that without crying. But anyway, these are the kinds of things that can have real resonance with your future student audiences and their parents, to know that your campus cares, your campus stepped up, your campus did something. to make the lives of your current students better during a very trying time. Where we see all these stories, almost a new one every day comes out from different countries and different institutions in the U.S. where the challenges with mental health crisis going on campus because of the impact of the pandemic and the isolation that so many students have had. You see that in elementary schools and high schools and middle schools that have gone online for the majority of last year, particularly those students in low-income neighborhoods that don't have reliable Wi-Fi, that had to go to McDonald's to do their classes, to do their classwork because they don't have it at home. This is the thing that these are the kinds of stories that show if your institution is stepping up and making a difference in your students' lives, the value of that is going to be far-reaching beyond just the good that you did for those students. So the last topic of the day, continuing on from last week's big news, big stories that we covered about all the STEM majors that have been added in by DHS to the list of academic programs that students can get 3 years of work permission per degree level, bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. It is a key distinguisher in U.S. international higher education promotion, and can and should be leveraged at every turn. So I hope you know, and I hope you distinguish in some way in your recruitment materials on your website which of your academic programs are STEM eligible. And I just did a feasibility study with a small liberal arts college that they're just trying to think about how they can do international. And one of the things I asked them to generate, from their registrar, get their list of their zip codes that they know are STEM eligible. And then that takes prominence in how they promote their programs to international students. And there are specific emails that can and should be devised in the ComFlow that highlight those benefits, because that is a distinguishing factor that gives the U.S. a leg up over the competition. Other countries have 2-year work permission now, or 12 months, 18 months here, 2 years there. We have potentially 3 years of work permission for 3 degrees. So a student that comes here, does a bachelor's degree, does 3 years of work, can then do a master's degree, do 3 more years of work, can do a PhD and do 3 more years of work, and all on an F1 student visa. And that's a value add that you can present that as a proposition. Most students won't do nearly all of that, but they can know that it is a potential reality for them, that depending on their program, if they choose a STEM program, that this is something that they can look forward to, and they can start picturing in their mind, wow, I can work for 3 years after I finish my bachelor's degree. And hopefully that company likes me, they want to hire me on longer term, and I get more experience. Maybe that's what the student wants, maybe it isn't. But at least they know it's an option. And that's something that drives so much interest around the world for university study outside home country. It's post-study work. Even China's gotten in on this. I think they grant 5-year visas for those that graduate with master's or doctoral level STEM programs. That they're going to give that kind of level of work permission for 5 years in China for that kind of a program. But China's got its own issues these days. Won't go into that. But some of the articles I'm sharing today, one is the Forbes article that from Stuart Anderson, who's regularly on the pro-immigration side and pro-H-1B and pro-OPT. So he talks about what those changes are and directs to the list of the definition of what those majors are, of the new ones that were added, the 22 new programs. But if you're trying to dial down to the actual full list, not just the new 22, but the full list. If your registrar doesn't have it, there is a full list of the majors available through the DHS sites for study in the States. You can find the STEM OPT Hub. You can find that list, and it's in the Federal Register, so it's kind of not a very user-friendly one, but you can get to that list fairly easily. Pi News also has an article this past week on how the international ed sector has reacted to Biden-Harris's STEM initiatives. So it's certainly no surprise that we in higher ed, our international higher ed, are really excited about some of these options that will expand the range of majors that can be attractive to international students from around the world. And another piece is from talking some real specifics about the impact of these majors can have. You look at data science, one of the new programs that was added to the list. Data science graduates in the United States on STEM OPT can now earn $100,000 per year, starting out six-figure salaries. And these are for mostly in the banking industry. JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo are the ones around the country, some in California, some in a number of them in New York, Charlotte, and New Jersey. So you have all of these players that have some of it's quant analysis, quant analytics, the job titles here: AI developer, AI machine learning associate, AI research senior associate, AVP of quant finance analyst, so associate software engineer. These are the kinds of majors that are high demand and have high salaries to start. Some of these are high salaries because of their locations in New York and California, but some of them are Charlotte, North Carolina. Can make $105,000 as a quant finance analyst. So really some concrete examples of what you can do. And when you as an institution can tie your graduates to some of these kinds of jobs, this is the ideal. When we talked about in our first article for this CPR series for IDP Connect, I talked about outcomes. And I said, how great would it be if you can have all the companies that your graduates have worked for, their position titles, and be able to capture that and then use that for on the front end of the process and talk about what the outcomes are for your international graduates. So this is the kind of data that your prospective students can and should see, particularly if you have a data science major, for example. The final bit is the question that I asked about STEM majors in this third question: how are STEM OPT majors driving innovation? You see a lot of this happening in the business field. And why is that important? And maybe the influence that the business community has with DHS in terms of their H-1B visas, and because obviously DHS regulates that in some way, shape, or form. It's also tied to OPT. And why do the business community wants students to have more work opportunity? Because it gives them an extra 2 years to vet a potential H-1B hire, as opposed to just one that they get for non-STEM majors. So business schools, and this is where the innovation piece comes in, these are oftentimes some of the early adopters of trying to configure their curriculum to allow for STEM majors. And there's an interesting piece from Poets and Quants, which is primarily a student-facing publication that talks primarily about top business schools and that type of thing. But they have a list on their site of all the major STEM programs at U.S. business schools. So when we talk about what those business programs are, we're talking about the programs in quantitative finance. We're talking about the programs in MIS. We're talking about economics and data analytics. We're talking about cybersecurity. We're talking about these kind of majors that are differentiators in terms of what will set apart some business schools over others. The data from this article suggests that about just over half of all business schools either have already STEM business majors within their, or structures within their MBA program, or offerings within their MBA program, and or are considering it. Considering adding those or working towards adding those. There are still roughly half of all business programs are not bothering going down that road, and those are the potentially some of the older, stodgier ones that don't see the need or don't feel the need to distinguish them. But when you look at some of these top schools here, Stanford, their business school, the entire full-time MBA program is now STEM eligible. They have MS degrees. They're Chicago's Booth School of Business, entire full-time MBA, STEM. UPenn, majors in full-time MBA, actuarial science, business analytics, business economic and public policy, business energy, environment and sustainability, operations, information and decisions, and statistics and quantitative finance. So these are the kinds of academic programs that are now STEM eligible that give business graduates an opportunity for 3 years of work before they have to worry about an H-1B. So this is gold for universities in terms of how you position yourselves in a globally competitive market for international student attention. When you can say to a business school graduate, if you come in and you do one of these business majors or business programs, you're going to have not 1 year, but 3 years of work permission. Whereas a little less than a year or two ago, you wouldn't have been able to get more than one. So this, without having, and that you're on a clock almost immediately when you start a job to try and impress, to get them to potentially sponsor you for an H-1B. But this now gives businesses 3 years to really get to know you before they have to commit the $3,000 or $4,000 that they need to sponsor you for that H-1B. So there's some really fantastic data in here and some great examples that you should share with your business college if they're not already moving in this direction, to look at some ways that they can add on to enhance the quality of their offerings to prospective students from overseas. So hopefully that makes a difference to you today. Hopefully you found some information here that will make a difference in your communication planning, in your just the way you approach your work, whether it's social media, whether it's COVID stories or STEM OPT. All of these things can be really valuable tools if used well in how you communicate with your prospective audiences. So until next time, have a great week, and we'll check in with you on the 9th. Cheers.